Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Lilith. We had a very thematic run today, and that's always exciting when you get to play as a character that's maybe not as good, but you get something that makes them shine. Like in this case, we got familiars, we got car battery with the box of friends, and you just have so many basically enemies and friends in a room that you can just instantly meld them without really having to be accurate. And I think that the problem that a lot of people have with Lilith is that you really can't aim your shots, and not only that, you're also kind of slow, and basically all of that is just combined to make it for a very unfun experience. But when you can just enter a room and rely on your familiars to do all the work for you, then I think it becomes a little bit more fun. And I am glad that we actually have these runs, which maybe showcase the strengths of the character. They don't necessarily only show the bad parts, or at least the annoying parts. But for me personally, it's not that you really can't aim well, or maybe that you're slow. Obviously that is annoying, and I would prefer it to not be that way. But it's more about that you really can't have any control over your tears. There's this physics in Isaac, and of course your tears and your shots, projectiles, or anything are affected by your velocity or how you move. But because you have Incubus on you, you really can't do that, because Incubus is always gonna lag behind, it's gonna move at a slower pace than you are, and then you're not really gonna be able to have so much finesse and control over your tears. And that's usually not that big of a problem, because enemies are pretty much stationary, some of them really don't have a lot of knockback. But when you have rooms like the ones you just saw, which have a lot of portals in them, then you need to find a way in order to deal with them. And usually knockback is the best solution, but if you don't really can that, or you can't angle your shots properly, then what ends up happening is you get swarmed, and then you can't end up shooting the enemies with Incubus. And I think maybe this is the best example of just how bad this can get, is when you have an Incubus and it actually lags behind so much when an enemy is chasing you that even though you're shooting forward, it can actually knock the enemy backwards into you, just because the Incubus is on the other side of the enemy. And that is really not something that you can control, and especially because of your low speed, sometimes you can't even outrun the bad enemies. So there's always that maybe element of unpredictability that I don't really enjoy as Lilith. But obviously in this particular case, I made my case a little bit worse, and that's because I found Tinted Rock in the very first room. Not Tinted Rock, but Small Rock, that's the one. And it's obviously a great item. Why wouldn't you pick it up? It's a damage upgrade, it's a tear delay downgrade, it's just a DPS overall good upgrade. But as Lilith, even though you're already kind of slow, picking it up I feel like makes it worse. But not in the sense that you would skip it, because obviously it's still a really good item. It does allow you to pretty much two-shot or maybe one-shot certain enemies that you would otherwise have to spend more tears on. But in this position, it did put as a 0.8 speed, and I feel like that's a little bit too much to handle. And I know it maybe sounds a bit weird when I say too much to handle when it's actually we have not enough speed, but it's really more of that what I was talking about before. It's just about the velocity and just the innate feeling of the game. And when you feel like you can't really outrun the enemies, or maybe when you feel like you don't really have that much control over your character, that's when I think Lilith becomes from a challenging character to something that is just maybe not as fun. But luckily, all of that combined, it still did turn out to be a pretty good run. And in this case, we got, of course, money equals power, and because of our small rock, our damage stat was actually pretty decent. With the void, we were able to kind of suck up some items and get some stats, for example, like tear delay. And it's just basically a matter of time until we start getting speed when we'll start sucking up the active items. And when you combine all of that, I feel like there is some basis for a good run here, but maybe I just mismanage it a little bit. Because with the Void, it's always a question, will I use it to try to get the active items that I have currently, or will I try to save it to hopefully maybe suck up other active items or the passive items so you can get some stat upgrades. And that decision I feel like is a pretty difficult one to make, and unless we have a lot of battery charges, which is why I did spend so much time at the shop, I was trying to maybe get Sack Boys, Sack of Sacks, anything like that would allow me to get more batteries, and that would allow me of course to not only use my item offensively, but also it would allow me to suck up more items as I actually went along. And maybe what's the best part about this is we went the angel route, and of course even though we only fought 2 or 3 angels because we didn't really have more bombs to do that, when the angels drop key fragments, we can actually use our active item, the Void, to suck them up and get a passive stat upgrade, which is usually a better deal than just increasing your angel chance. This is something that I haven't talked about, but just as a side note, since I'm talking about it, is every time you pick up a key fragment, it not only gives you a key fragment to open up the Mega Satan door, but that doesn't work on dailies which don't go to Mega Satan, so there's no point in picking them up. But what it also does is it increases the chance of you encountering angel statues. So I would always pick up 1 or maybe 2, depending on just how much incentive I want to get, but you have to look at it this way. Usually the key fragments pay for themselves, because it makes it more likely for the angel rooms to appear, and when you get that, of course, you can bomb them to get more exploration bonus, and essentially one angel is gonna pay for you're gonna get more points than you're gonna lose for picking up 2 key fragments or 2 items in total, so it's usually a good idea to do so if you actually want to maximize your score. But in this case, I wasn't really too worried about it, because I felt like I just need strong items to persevere, and it doesn't matter if I get an angel room or a devil deal, I'll take it, or at least I'll take whatever I can get. Especially with so many red hearts and so many ways to generate spirit hearts via the relic and of course the dark bomb, I really didn't feel like I was in a position where I could maybe say no to one or the other. Obviously it's great if you get angel rooms, because we can get more points, but I feel like if you don't get some good items very fast, we're gonna be left behind, and I'm just gonna end up having a really bad run. And you can see I was only at 19,500 points here, which is usually really bad, because you would expect to have at least 3,000 points more after you finish boss rush. And when you kind of combine all of that's just due to damage penalty, me not actually exploring that much because the run was slow, both in the literal sense because we didn't have much speed, and also in that figurative sense that there were just so many rooms and a lot of enemies which were actually kind of hard to deal with, and it did prove to be maybe a bit more challenging than I thought. And all of that kind of added up in the end that I was actually, I had to skip some rooms if I wanted to get to boss rush, but luckily I did. And of course, I usually wouldn't do that, but I feel like with Lilith we have a lot more autonomy over it, because with the Box of Friends, or at least in this case the Void, and with the Box of Friends which is in the Void, we can use that combo to get just a bunch of familiars. Of course, we can duplicate them multiple times, and that just makes boss rush so much easier. And even if you have a really weak run, when you actually have like 20 familiars shooting at the same boss, you're pretty much guaranteed to melt them instantly. And also after that, when you beat them, you're usually still in a pretty good position. At least in this case I was, because I had the Rotten Baby, I still had an Incubus, and also had the Cube of Meat, well, the Bandage Ball, whatever. And that allowed me to maybe be in a position where I felt like even if boss rush did take me a bit longer, it took me I think 3 or 4 minutes in total, which is not that bad, but even if it did take me longer, I can still use all of these familiars that I have on me to deal with Womb 1 and Womb 2 as fast as possible and try to get to the end. And as I said before, luckily our speed stat did come up just by the virtue of us having PhD. We got a lot of speed upgrades, but also by the virtue of us just getting items which increase our speed. So in this case we got the blood bag and of course growth hormones and things like that. That all kind of helped and contribute to this run just feel a little bit better. But even though I said that it was a fun run which included a lot of familiars and it was a very thematic run, I still feel like I was in a position where I couldn't rely on them so much, and that's mainly because there's so many of them that you really have no way of knowing where a certain enemy is, and then you really can't line your familiars up. So for example, sometimes I want to shoot with my little brimstone, but I can't really know where my little brimstone is gonna be when I stop, because they have this weird movement to them, they follow other ones, and it just ends up being a mess, and it's very hard to aim. And if you have familiars which are kind of near you, it's obviously much easier, because then you can use yourself as the reference for shooting an enemy. But if you have a chain of like 20 familiars or 10 familiars or whatever, then you really can't know where your last familiar is, or where basically any other familiar is, and that just makes it that it's much harder to actually aim and shoot. And all of that did combine to make for a bit of an, I would say, even though it was a thematic run, it wasn't really an accurate run, if that makes any sense. But yeah, it was what it was. I really can't complain too much, because at least it did get better later on, and I can't complain because I also made it to boss rush and harsh. So if it was a really weak run, I feel like I wouldn't be able to get there, but I did, and I feel like that at least deserves a mention in some regard. Because I had the armed drowsy pill and I used one on harsh, I actually managed to get through it without getting hit once, and that's always exciting. And I'm actually planning on fighting delirium with the other armed drowsy pill. That's something that I've never tried before. That is fighting delirium with the armed drowsy pill, even though in theory I would imagine it would go pretty well, but I still don't know how fast he teleports, or maybe how unpredictable he is when he actually gets low on health, or it, or whatever he's basically, or it's basically everything that you can imagine, because he takes forms of other monsters and enemies. But with Drowsy Pill, I hoped maybe that he would be a little bit easier of a challenge, but I did kind of overestimate my damage output. I felt like if I do duplicate it with the CRYR better, I'm gonna have enough damage output that I would be able to deal with it. in a very fast manner, but it just really wasn't. So I guess what was great about it is my chain was very long, so as he teleported around, I always had something in its place, so I was able to deal some damage. So I did have some consistent DPS, but it wasn't really in the sense of me just killing it super fast. And what's really surprising, maybe even though it is slowed down, it actually affects the particular enemies, but when it teleports around, it just teleports at the speed of light, and there's really no way of knowing. But when it does actually finish its teleporting, then it gets slowed down back again, and then you can actually start reacting to it and dodging its attacks. So it's not that bad, but all in all, it's still not a pleasurable fight, and I maybe thought that Amdraz is gonna make it a bit more fun, but it really just made it a bit more tedious, because I felt like everything was moving in slow motion, and I just felt like I was fighting him for much longer than I needed to, and that's also partially just to how much health he has, and yeah, you know, that is delirium for you, I guess. I really don't know what they were thinking when they added this boss. I understand the concept, but making him teleport so much and just shoot in random directions, that couldn't have been a good idea, and I feel like if they had more of a sense of what the players wanted, they really wouldn't put this in the game. But I can't complain too much. It's a new boss, it's a new floor. I enjoy it for what it is, and it's always nice to break that monotony of just going to the chest every single time when you try to finish a run. And going to the void is, I would say, a nice alternative. And sometimes you get an drowsy pill, you have the need to experiment, and you go fight delirium and actually beat him without taking a hit. So again, I really don't know why I'm complaining. I feel like I complained a lot in this episode, but it really had no warranty because I managed to get through it without actually getting hit at all. So we got 471 damage penalty, item penalty, which is not too bad, but also goes to show that it wasn't a really particularly strong run. Our damage penalty was just through the roof, there's nothing I can do about that. And our swag bonus and exploration bonus are maybe a bit on the low side, but because we did get to both rushes, I still managed to rank pretty well in the 27th place. So it was a run for what it was. I feel like it was maybe a bit more disjointed or maybe a bit more confusing than usual, but that's just how dailies are. Some dailies aren't fun, they're very straightforward, and some dailies are like this one, which are a bit confusing, and I'm not really sure what to talk about. So I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.